Chairman Thomas, Vice Chair Matthews, Ranking Member Isaacson, and members of the House Judiciary Committee, thank you for this opportunity to provide opponent testimony on House Bill 88. As mentioned, my name is Gary Daniels. I'm here representing the ACLU of Ohio. As you know, HB 88 is a bill to dramatically increase drug trafficking penalties in Ohio. HB 88 also contains human trafficking provisions, but my remarks today address the former. Ohio is deeply embroiled in an ongoing drug addiction crisis. Its causes and its solutions are complex. Its effects are widespread. It touches us all, regardless of location, income, age, gender, race, or religion. This committee and this bill's sponsors are right to be concerned and searching for answers. Indeed, there is no single cause and no single answer. For half a century, the overwhelming government response to substance abuse problems has been punishment and incarceration. In recent memory, some states have opted for different, bipartisan approaches and experienced significant drops in prison and jail population with no demonstrable negative impact on public safety and with better metrics than Ohio in such crucial areas as addiction and overdose rates. In Ohio, punishment and incarceration remain the preferred approaches of the General Assembly. According to the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, for over the past 10 years, the number one reason a person enters an Ohio prison is for drug possession. During that same time frame, the number two reason is drug trafficking. Over 6 years ago, Senate Bill 1 went into effect. SB 1 significantly raised penalties for fentanyl and related substances. At that time, Ohioans were told how badly SB 1 was needed and its certain positive impact against drug traffickers and addiction problems. If those are the metrics to judge SB 1, it has clearly failed, as have numerous other bills of its type over the years in Ohio and elsewhere. Some claim the reason stiffer penalties for drug offenses have not worked is because the punishment is not harsh enough. This has been their position for some or all of the past 50 years. Can we identify another collection of laws and policies still in use that have been so counterproductive and failed so badly and so often to reach the intended goals? By any objective measure, the war on drugs has been a miserable failure. Among its 148 pages, HB 88 increases trafficking penalties at least 27 times. Felony levels are repeatedly raised above current law, anywhere from 1 to 3 levels, depending on the substance and weight. Given the rate we currently imprison drug traffickers, it will certainly expand our overcrowded prison system. After all, HB 88 is designed to do exactly that. Which brings me to the second consideration I urge this committee to keep in mind in its consideration of this bill: the financial costs of HB 88 and the sources of this additional funding. Former DRC Director Gary Moore once remarked, to build, staff, and maintain one prison costs $1 billion over 20 years. That figure has surely increased, as it has been several years since he was director. But what has remained almost entirely unaddressed in previous hearings on HB 88 and HB 230 before its last session are details and answers for these fundamental questions about the passage of HB 88. How many more prisons will need built? How soon? How much will they cost? And how will they be funded? With HB 88 going into effect 90 days after its passage, are allocations planned via the current budget bill? Because with the number of drug traffickers we already incarcerate, combined with our currently overcapacity prison system, the spigot of HB 88 will soon start flowing and quickly necessitate hundreds of millions of dollars in new spending. Meanwhile, all this time, energy, and money devoted to HB 88 distracts from what we know works with regard to drug addiction. That is, properly addressing the demand side of this equation. You can pass whatever laws you want. You can imprison every drug trafficker arrested. You can seal the southern, northern, eastern, and western borders with impenetrable walls. But you still will not keep people from manufacturing and selling drugs to others so long as there is sufficient demand and lots of money to be made. And tragically, there is lots and lots of demand in Ohio and across the United States. The billions HB 88 will likely cost over time could be better spent providing physical and mental health care to those who lost their jobs or whose jobs provide zero health care. That money could be allocated to effective and relevant job training and education expanding opportunities and reducing stress for vulnerable Ohioans who turn to drugs when those opportunities shrink and cease to exist. The funding could offset the astronomical increases in real estate, rent, and childcare prices that make everyday living a source of great anxiety to so many. These are only a few ways the General Assembly can address demand instead of using the tired, old, ineffective approach of cops, courts, and cages. And this money could be redirected to ensure people do not have to travel to other counties across the state to seek effective drug treatment, assuming they can afford it if they find it, or assuming the treatment location has the capacity to help yet another person. These are all long identified problems with drug treatment in Ohio that remain unsolved. None of this is easy, but after 50 years, it is crystal clear what does not work. Government and society cannot incarcerate its way out of drug problems. It has been tried and failed year after year, decade after decade, generation after generation for at least half a century. All the while, other states and other countries take different approaches, chart different paths, and see improvements across the board in addressing addiction and reducing mass incarceration. The ACLU of Ohio believes everyone here is sincere about minimizing the horrific effects of addiction in our state. But House Bill 88 offers more of the failed status quo. Pass this bill, and we will all be back in another year or two for the latest bill addressing the newest substance to pack even more people in prison and jail, with claims the fresh new legislation will be the one to finally turn the tide. Only it will not, if the past 50 years in our current state of affairs are any clue. The ACLU of Ohio remains ready, willing, and able to work with all members of the General Assembly to find effective solutions. But we urge this committee to reject House Bill 88 for all the reasons mentioned and more. Thank you. Concludes my testimony.
Mr. Daniel, thank you for your testimony. Are there any questions for the witness? Representative Plummer with question.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Daniels. We always have this great debate. Let's go back to Oregon. Oregon, who decriminalized drugs, and I think they're walking that failed policy back all of a sudden because it hasn't worked out too well for Oregon. So cops, courts, and cages must have some value if they implemented a largely left policy that has pretty much destroyed their communities. They're walking that back all of a sudden. So something must be working if their system failed, number one. We always want to talk about cost of jails and prisons. What's the cost of mothers that lost loved children due to this selfish person selling their kid fentanyl and killing them? What's that cost?
Through the chair to Representative Plummer, I know a little bit about what's happened in Oregon. I'm certainly no expert. I don't know everything that's happened in and out, but I think, and I believe what they were anticipating in Oregon with the decriminalizing and lowering penalties for certain drugs and substances, this is spokes in a wheel. You can't just address one spoke and hope that the wheel keeps going or is effective. And I think what the approach was, well, we're going to press this lever over here with regard to criminal punishments for drugs and hope, for instance, that treatment expands, that Oregon properly addressed the demand side of this, and that doesn't appear to have happened in Oregon. You had one lever being pressed with all of the other necessary levers not being pressed or pressed sufficiently. And again, I think everybody's concern, including yours, is valid and it's welcome with regard to this problem. As I said, this is a crisis and it's complex and it's not easy. But I have to go back again to, we have tried this for multiple generations of people, for half a century, to do this exact same approach. Ranking Member Isaacson mentioned the war on drugs from the 90s. The war on drugs never ended. It's not the war on drugs in the 90s. Again, the number one reason we throw a person in prison in Ohio is drug possession, and that has been the case for many, many years. What we don't know, and I hope that this committee, and urge this committee to examine, is exactly the impact on the prison population. I know DRC is understandably hesitant to make these forecasts because you never know exactly what the future is going to hold. Ohio could pass other laws, expungement, sealing, alternatives to prison that will help relieve some of that impact on the prison population. And thankfully, Ohio has taken a bipartisan approach on those issues over the years. But what we see is that Ohio's prison population really doesn't budge as a result because we keep throwing so many more of these people into prison that it outpaces any of these types of reform efforts that we are doing. And when we do consider and pass reform efforts, it's oftentimes very limited. You're often cherry picking and taking the people that certainly need the help and provides relief. I don't want to discount legislation that the General Assembly has passed previously, but oftentimes it will say something like, well, if you have 2 or more offenses, you're now ineligible. Well, in that case, you're oftentimes leaving behind the people that could benefit the most. So again, it's the very real world impact on people is there. But I certainly urge this committee again to examine the impact on the prison population. And just as a quick related aside, some people look at this, I think, in an incorrect way. They say, okay, Ohio's prison population is designed to hold roughly 38,000 people. We are currently at almost 45,000 people. I started doing this work for the ACLU back in 1995. At that point, our prison system was overcrowded. Here we are 30 years later, and it is still overcrowded. And it's not enough to say, well, if you just, if we're 7,000 above capacity with the whole system, that's not the right way to look at it, because you have to look at this prison by prison. We have one women's prison. If that prison goes above capacity in a dangerous and other considerations kind of way, we're going to have to build another women's prison. In Ohio, you're divided up by prison by your offense, essentially, is one of the considerations. But so you can't look at, the point is you can't look at the prison system as a whole. You have to look at each individual prison and its capacity, because if those prisons that are holding people with drug trafficking offenses are overcrowded, you have to look at essentially 25 to 28 different systems, not just the one central DRC system. By 25 to 28, I mean the number of prisons we have here in Ohio.
Follow-up? Representative Plummer, follow-up? No. Okay. Yeah, no problem. Ranking Member Isaacson with a question.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your testimony today. And you're right about my focus on the 90s. That's my a generational take there. Can you? Sorry, guys. Can you explain a little bit more in detail about what are the actual day-to-day real-world risks that this bill would cause for sort of both potentially victims of trafficking, right, who there's no carve-out for in the bill, and who would get caught up as being part of some sort of massive trafficking scheme, who are themselves victims, and the people who are sort of, whether they should or shouldn't be using, these drugs recreationally are, and would get caught up as sort of mandatory minimum 5 years for, trafficking fentanyl when they're sort of, they thought they were just going to a party to have fun, or whatever it is people do with these drugs, I don't know. But on the recreational side. So can you just speak to the real world implications that you're talking about?
Through the chair to Ranking Member Isaacson, look, I realize that this is not popular testimony. To come in, and it seems like, the ACLU comes in defending drug traffickers or fentanyl traffickers, and that's not the case at all. What we're urging is to look at this from sort of a 30,000-foot view, to say, you can keep doing this, and you've been doing it for 50 years now, but unless there's proper attention paid to the demand side, we're just going to keep having these problems over and over again. And it's not like every state is facing this to the degree that Ohio is, or certainly every country is. There are other people, other places out there doing this differently than Ohio is, and having better results. So again, while sealing and expungement and alternatives to prison and everything are most welcome, that's addressing the back end of the problem. And so oftentimes the ACLU of Ohio will appear and say, what about the demand side of the problem? Because if we don't tackle that demand side of the problem, we're just going to keep spinning our wheels here. And there's a lot of data we just simply do not know in Ohio. Among all of these drug traffickers and people convicted and imprisoned for drug possession in Ohio, How many people are in Ohio's prisons specifically because of fentanyl or a fentanyl-related substance? How many people are in there because it's their first offense, their second offense, their third offense? How long are they actually in prison for? I know for drug possession, it's kind of like a spinning door. You've got people that are in there for months, not years, with regard to their overall impact on the prison population. So again, we urge, while there are the real-world impacts, that you talk about and you're concerned with, what we're hoping for and pleading for is much more focus and attention on the demand side, so that bills like House Bill 88, hopefully, people don't see as necessary. That Ohio has. We're never going to eliminate this problem entirely, of course, but we've been trying this for at least 50 years. And it hasn't gotten us anywhere close, I think, to what everybody wants to see accomplished. So, again, that's part of our plea here is, address the demand side and, keep doing the backside of it too, but that front side, we need a whole lot more.
Follow-up? No. Representative Williams with a question?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for coming to testify today. Don't get me wrong, I have certain concerns about portions of the bill that I'm working out with the sponsors, but you said it like 3 or 4 times, we've tried it for 50 years and it hasn't worked. Mm-hmm. Well, the war on drugs increased penalties for crack cocaine possession and trafficking. The rate of crack cocaine use has dropped exponentially over the last 50 years. I would say that worked, right? We increased penalties for heroin possession, but we also increased treatment for heroin as well. So I think increased penalties, study after study have shown if you get increased penalties over 60 months, it does start to have an impact. A little bit different when it comes to like users, and that's where my concern comes in the possession part of it. Can you talk about that, the removal of the knowledge requirement for possession of fentanyl in this bill? And is that a concern, that an individual could think they're buying 1 gram of cocaine, 19-year-old in college, and there's 1 drop of fentanyl in it, and it turns into a fentanyl-related compound under a different sentencing structure? Does that cause you any concern at all, that portion of the bill?
Through the chair to Representative Williams, thank you for your question. Yes, it does. And left it out of my testimony and perhaps given the discussion with the previous witness in the committee on that particular issue, I was starting to wish, well, maybe I did put it in there because of the conversation that was had. But again, I was hoping to focus on the, again, sort of the more global kind of 30,000-foot view look at this. And it's perhaps, if you throw people in prison for a certain amount of time, what you might be doing with at least some of these people, because again, I stay away from black and white statements with regard to this sort of thing, whether it's addiction or imprisonment or what have you, because some things, for some people who are addicts, the light does go off when they get involved with the criminal justice system. That's it for them. And so for those particular people, that might help. So I don't want to say like every single time that the state does this, it's the wrong thing to do, it's ineffective, because we do have individuals. We always advocate for talk to the directly impacted people about what it is that works for them. And they have come in to committees like this and said, look, that's when the light went off, when I got arrested, when I got thrown in jail, when I got thrown in jail the 3rd time, when I got sentenced to prison. Something went off and I turned away from drugs. So certainly you're going to have some people that if you increase their punishment, they might get out of or will get out of the drug trafficking business. But when you look at the overall numbers, again, 10 plus years, drug trafficking being the number 2 reason a person goes to an Ohio prison, clearly people are being punished. Some people like to, when they're supporting bills of this type, say, we just need to keep increasing the punishment. But that's what we've been doing, over the years with regard to this. And so it's, again, our take on this is, let's move much more towards the demand side. Treatment is great. But you have an awful lot of people out there in Ohio that cannot access treatment. They can't find it. They can't afford it. Some of it is ineffective, certainly, and that's not always treatment or the treatment provider's fault. Addiction is a thorny complicated issue, absolutely, no doubt about it. I've seen it myself with people I know repeatedly over the years. So it's not like your tire goes flat and you just fill it with air. And if that doesn't work, you get a new tire or you patch it and you're on your way. Addiction is much different. It differs from person to person, and how that particular person gets out of addiction, if they do, differs from person to person. Extremely complicated and complex. And as I mentioned, I think everybody is right to be concerned about this sort of stuff. It's just whether incarceration and the building of new prisons is the way to go.
Follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So sorry I was a little late to committee. I was testifying in another committee, so I didn't get to hear the first witness, but I can anticipate what his testimony was, because me and Lou have a good relationship and we talk about a lot of bills. The second concern that I have with this legislation is the intended goal of stair-stepping penalties. Right now, the way that this is drafted, as soon as you get over 1 gram to 100 grams, the penalties are exactly the same. Mm-hmm. So do you think that will encourage people that are considering engaging in drug trafficking just to have larger amounts on them up to 100 grams? Because the difference between 5 grams of fentanyl and 100 grams of fentanyl is going to be the exact same penalty now under this currently proposed bill. Mm-hmm. Does that cause you any pause at all? Because, I mean, the idea was that it would be structured, the more weight, the higher the penalty, as a deterrent towards possessing the higher weights. And now we're kind of removing that general deterrent that was included in stair-stepping penalties.
Mm-hmm. Through the chair to Representative Williams, yes, that's always a concern. I mean, I don't, among directly impacted people that the ACLU of Ohio and our coalition partners talk to and work with, I don't think among them are drug traffickers or certainly fentanyl traffickers, but I could see very much the logic that you talk about carrying the day for a lot of people. That is, if there's no real difference between 1 and 100, then why don't I get to as close to 100 as possible? So, that could be, again, a very real consequence of these types of penalties that are found in House Bill 8080. And I counted at least 27 times that the trafficking penalties are increased. Sometimes, 1 degree, 2 degree, 3 degree, including what we see is a return to or increased number of mandatory minimums in our prison system, taking us back to largely a 90s approach with these sorts of things that is still maintained today. But in the criminal legal system reform and drug policy in particular, I think we all see, speaking here for others informally, the biggest failure we can see in these types of things is the building of actual new prisons. That's when things really get serious, and I think that's what we're in store for here, should this legislation pass the way that it currently is.
Representative Plummer, do you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll be brief. We got to pull a lot of levers to fix this. You mentioned some of it. We've sealed and expunged records. I passed the bill to help people seal and expunge their records due to addiction. We've expanded treatment. There's a lot more treatment now than there was 6 years ago. So we're pulling all levers. I want to talk about the recreational piece. So you think somebody should be held accountable? If I'm going to give Josh a couple pills I got on the street corner, here, Josh, try these. I'm not sure what they are, and he dies. Should I be held accountable? It might be to what level we debate, but if I accidentally shoot Josh, I'm held accountable, right? But if I give him some illegal pills recreationally, should I be held accountable for his death?
Through the chair to Representative Plummer, and there's been bills of that type. Certainly, there was debate previously in the General Assembly about, for instance, whether somebody can be charged with manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter as a result of providing substances to people who overdose. I don't remember any of those bills exactly passing, but I do see, prosecutors are prosecuting people for either manslaughter or involuntary manslaughter. So somewhere along the line, that particular problem got fixed. We're not here to ACLU, of course, is not here to say, look, there should be no accountability whatsoever. We're just saying that when the focus is almost exclusively on accountability, and Ohio has made some improvements. Drug overdose rates is one of those areas. What's this? We're in 2025, 2023. I think it was a 5% reduction in overdose deaths in Ohio, and then 9% in 2024. So we're making certainly improvement on the overdose rates above and beyond certainly what some other states. Ohio was number 2 for a while, and we're down around number 12 now, which still is not satisfactory by any means, but certainly don't want people to consider overdose rates being, and deaths being the only consideration here. So, if the bill was to totally remove all penalties for drug traffickers, or, greatly reduce them or what have you, I don't think I would be here testifying today. But when the concern is the financial impact on our prison system and the fact that we've tried this kind of thing for 50 years and it just has not worked, that's what motivates us here with more general testimony to say, hey, look, this hasn't worked. How long are we going to keep trying this? Another 5 years, another 50 years before we finally say, hey, look, it's time for something different.
Representative Sonnenberg with a question.
Thank you, Chair Thomas, and to the witness, thank you for your testimony today. I think, personally, I think that there's a supply and a demand issue, and we should focus on both. I do hear what you're saying about looking at the data, and are we really being effective here over time with the so-called war on drugs? But certainly there are those who deserve prison, I believe. But often in these bills, there's the unintended consequences or the hidden parts. And one thing that we haven't discussed a lot is the human trafficking part of this bill. And so do you think that the bill is too harsh in terms of victims themselves of human trafficking who are used in that trade as like a middle person, as often is the case? There's no carve-out or exception for them with the knowingly being involved in human trafficking. Do you think that that's also something that should be corrected in this legislation?
Through the chair to Representative Sonnenberg, I will confess my almost exclusive attention on this bill has been on the drug trafficking part of it, not the human trafficking part of it. We have similar concerns with any bill that increases jail and prison populations. But I learned years ago, coming in bill after bill, year after year, on all of those bills and trying to make the same points on jail and prison population, I think it just, people start to tune out, everybody gets worn out and everything, so we tend to pick and choose our battles a little bit more. You heard the Ohio Prosecuting Attorneys Association come up on the sports official assault bill. We have very much the same opinion as the prosecutors do on that bill, where you start elevating some victims above others with regard to that. But what we don't see with Ohio's prison population data, that's available and readily easy to find online, is human trafficking defendants. That's not what's fueling our jail and prison population. I would imagine for human trafficking offenses, and it's been relatively recent that Ohio has been passing penalties specific to human trafficking or enhancing those types of penalties. But I would bet it doesn't make it into the top 10, the top 20, the top 25, the top 30 offenses that is a reason why somebody goes to an Ohio prison. But with drug trafficking being the number 2 reason, in an overcrowded prison system where we spend over $2 billion, or are set to spend over $2 billion per year on the prison system, that's where our focus is.
Follow up? Okay. Representative Sonnenberg?
Understood. Thank you. No further questions. Thank you.
Representative Plummer?
Yeah, Chair, one final point, not to beat a dead horse, but we've really worked on the supply part. Our prison populations were 50,000, but due to our policy changes, not many addicts, F4s and F5s, are going to prison. We all can agree on that. So we've done a good job with keeping them out of prison, giving them the proper treatment. Now we got to be a little stronger with the demand. I mean, like I said, it's a lot of levers. We're pulling a lot of levers, but eventually when the greedy fentanyl dealers killing our kids, they need to be held accountable. So just a statement, Chair. Thanks.
And just very briefly, Chairman Thomas, to Representative Plummer, understood, again, Ohio has done some good things with regard to, not throwing absolutely everybody in prison, on these types of things. Our prison population over the last 25, 30 years did peak at about 51,000 people, and it has receded slightly. since then. But when you look at the percentage of people going to prison for drug possession or drug trafficking, or the overall numbers, those numbers remain pretty consistent year after year, whether it's fiscal year, calendar year, what have you. DRC has this data, divided up by offense in the prison system that they release by calendar year and fiscal year. It takes a lot of reading and a lot of parsing through to see, but you can look right now, you can go online and see, what offenses have people going to prison, which what we don't get again is that granular detail. Drug trafficking is one thing, but how many of those people are trafficking fentanyl-related substances? What's their term of imprisonment? What number offense is this? What number of time have they been incarcerated? And I do hope and I do urge, because that's the type of detail that's not available online. I'm sure it exists somewhere in DRC world. I'm sure I could do a records request and get a response 6 months later if I get one at all. But I do urge this committee to look into those particular issues. Maybe we're wrong. Maybe this won't lead to expansions of prisons because, but I have to think that it is because of fentanyl. As I think it was when the previous debate and discussion about the knowingly standard. Yeah, I think that's what it basically boils down to is, fentanyl mixed with cocaine is not a cocaine case anymore. That's a fentanyl case. Fentanyl mixed with heroin is no longer a heroin case. That's a fentanyl case now. So, a lot of these drug trafficking and drug possession crimes and convictions, they are all fentanyl, or many of them are fentanyl because there's any amount of fentanyl involved. So I would bet that if we are able to break down drug trafficking and drug possession and people going to prisons and jails, it's largely fentanyl-based at this particular time. So again, our concern is, and we've got concerns about prison expansion, and people were raising the alarms with the return to indefinite sentencing here in Ohio a couple legislative sessions ago. So we might already be in that direction right now, necessitating another prison or prisons here in Ohio. But hopefully trying to stem the tide here with regard to this. But yes, House Bill 86, I think, is what you're referring to, enacted back in 2011. That was the one that said, hey, the presumption for prison, we're not going to, we're going to have a presumption for these lower level felonies not to put people in prison. But that it hasn't really fundamentally budged the numbers with regard to the reasons people go to an Ohio prison or the number of people going.
Any further questions for the witness? Seeing none, Mr. Daniels, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.